One night, after a varsity soccer game, I pulled into my driveway and woke up. An hour had passed, and I had fallen asleep at the wheel. At this moment, I realized something uncomfortable. I was in denial. Looking back, there were signs everywhere. I fell asleep during homework. I sent gibberish in text messages. I had strange cravings, dirt, expo markers, metal. I told myself this was normal. Everybody struggles with this. Everyone has these cravings, right? For months afterward, I kept asking myself the same question. How did I get here? There were signs, and I had noticed them, and yet I had chosen not to listen. At this moment, I realized something more important than a medical diagnosis of anemia. Rather, I learned about my internal dialogue and how critical it can be when we don't examine it. Everyone has an internal dialogue. I've defined it as a running commentary that predicts outcomes, judges experiences, worth, value, and helps us to establish identity. It is interactive with our surroundings. It helps us to shift our responses. It is dynamic. Most of the time, we don't question our internal dialogue because most of the time, we don't want to. We live in a culture that rewards distraction from this internal dialogue. Doom scrolling, constant noise, letting someone else think for us, quick answers. Ultimately, these avenues are ways to the same thing. But avoidance comes at a cost. When we silence reflection, we are more likely to mistake improper voices for that of strength. Think about it this way. Our mind is like a radio. Radios have countless channels that play simultaneously. When one chooses the wrong frequency, the right one doesn't simply just disappear. Rather, it's drowned out. This is precisely what we must learn to avoid. Thankfully, psychology gives us a dialogue for this. Our internal dialogue is not shaped by just accuracy. Rather, it's shaped by perceived usefulness, repetition, and emotional intensity. Some thoughts guard us temporarily. Denial, half-truths, blatant lies. Denial is defined as refusal to admit reality or truth of something. A dramatic example of this would be, you are standing out in the middle of a rainstorm, and you tell yourself, I'm not wet, and it's not raining. Half-truths are defined as a statement that intermingles both truth and falsehood with the intent to deceive. Perhaps an example of this would be when you tell yourself, I'm not avoiding it, I'm just waiting for the right time. Blatant, defined as noisy, especially offensive or vulgar. Perhaps an example of this could be a playful one at that. When a little girl is told by her mother that she is not allowed to have a dessert before dinner and tells her mom, I didn't have a cookie, with her mouth half full. But when these thoughts are repeated, they become automatic. I didn't collapse from exhaustion overnight. Rather, I trained myself, thought for thought, not to listen. Ignoring my intuition, I chose to listen to that specific voice, the voice we have learned not to question. A great example of this would be what I would refer to as the runner's mentality. When I went running, I would often motivate myself saying, if you don't push on further, then you're a whip, amongst other condescending things. Runners adopt this mentality as a form of encouragement. They push harder and harder, believing that stopping is equal to weakness. But yet, no matter how far they go or where they end up, satisfaction never comes. Instead of listening to a voice that sustains them, they adopt a stream of insults, mistaking harshness for truth. So what was the result of this mindset? For me, I stopped running. I stopped loving individual sports. I could not simply just push on for myself. My self-image felt attacked. As a result, the only sports I was able to partake in were that of a team. But yet, the poor mindset still lived on. It rather just changed shape. This new mindset can look like this. As athletes, we tell ourselves we play through pain for the good of a team. But really, we're silencing our bodies, admitting that when we talk about pain, that's weakness. We push harder and harder, believing that stopping is equal to failure. And yet, we never truly understand that how we respect our bodies is how we truly honor the team. Even when my body was screaming the truth at me, I chose not to listen. I was only listening to that specific voice. But there comes a time when one is pulled into the wilderness, a place where the noise fades and one can no longer ignore what their body and soul have been trying to tell them. The wilderness effect is a motif used across literature, psychology, and myth to describe one depleted of external structures such as confirmation, affirmation, and routine. It is here where the internal dialogue is more prominent. Here, survival that is physical is not only critical, but also one's internal interpretation of reality. The wilderness strips away the noise to reveal default patterns that distraction had been masking. It is here that the internal dialogue is most influential because there is nothing else competing with it. Think of The Hatchet, a classic novel written by Gary Paulson about a little boy who's stranded in the Canadian wilderness. It is here that not only physical survival is necessary, but mental survival. He is finally forced to face the reality of his divorced parents. It is here in these stories that they ask the same question. What is real? How do we know? And what happens when the noise fades and one is left with their thoughts? For me, my wilderness was not the wilderness of The Hatchet. It was in my driveway. It was here I was finally forced to stop, finally forced to listen. When the noise fades, default patterns of the mind are revealed. Control, self-justification, fear, or sometimes the truth. But here's the thing. Not all lies come from within. Many of our thoughts are absorbed quietly from culture, politics, family, religion, and expectation. How have your beliefs and thoughts been formed? Let's start with where we're at. In the United States, I believe we're fed a powerful narrative. Be self-made, push through, don't ask for help, endure. Rest looks like weakness. Strength looks like endurance. In collectivist cultures, Japan, China, India, Korea, perhaps the story is a little different, but equally persuasive. Don't burden the group. Persevere quietly. Your needs come second to the collective. Asking for help can feel selfish. And yet, perhaps the same story is cultivated. Sacrifice of self for the sake of an ideal, whether it's independence or harmony. And once a voice helps us to belong, once it helps us to gain some sort of power or to function, it can be extremely hard to question. Awareness here is only half the battle. When one is aware of the lies they tell themselves, it doesn't fix anything. Awareness without action is another form of avoidance. In fact, you are choosing to be naive. But the goal of this is not to blame others, our family, or even ourselves. but rather to take responsibility for the one thing we can do: how we respond to our thoughts. So, how do we begin? Not with 10 hacks, not with purely positive thinking, but with practice. First, create space for silence. Reduce noise, sit in discomfort, stop filling every gap. Bella, a college student, constantly spends her time with work, courses, and also extracurriculars. Her silent moments are often filled with music, podcasts, books, scrolling. In her silent moments, Bella realizes that she feels uncomfortable, restless, anxious. But it's in these silence moments that Bella is able to recognize that no matter how much she accomplishes, these thoughts still occur. Silence helps to reveal patterns that distraction masks. And when one does not have time to create the silence, one might not be able to truly identify the voices that remain in our internal dialogue. 2, observe without judgment. Notice when thoughts appear. When do they appear? What triggers them? How do they appear? Jacob, a professional, notices he has declining motivation and also is experiencing chronic fatigue. Now, the internal dialogue here is critical. You're lazy. Other people do this just fine. What is wrong with you? Instead of questioning or criticizing this thought, rather, Jacob simply notes when this thought appears. After missed meals, before high-pressure deadlines, poor sleep. Observing without judgment helps us to take the thought for what it truly is without automatically having to attribute it to our identity. Third, establish a guidepost as truth. Ask yourself these questions. What do I value? What do I believe? What is my purpose? Very weighty questions. But future thoughts are evaluated against these guideposts. Guideposts do not relieve all tension, but rather seek to promote clarity. Without a reference point, everything can feel equally convincing. Fourth, evaluate thoughts by their fruit. Not, is this thought comforting? But what does this thought produce? Does it lead to connection or isolation, growth or to fear? Edward, a graduate student, constantly tells himself, if I don't do this by myself, then I'm failing. Now the thought feels motivating. It seems to hold a sense of confidence, even competence. But when the fruit of the thoughts are revealed, there are isolation, burnout, resentment. Instead of asking yourself, is this thought admirable? Is this thought strengthening? Ask yourself, what does this thought cultivate? Awareness helps to reframe help-seeking from weakness to strength. Finally, take responsibility. Not because you were wronged, not because you deserve better, but because your thoughts shape your actions and your actions shape those of the lives around you. Instead of withdrawing or criticizing, think to promote clarity. Ask for feedback. Delegate more intentionally. Nothing changes overnight, but perhaps the environment around you does, whether instantaneously or slowly. Responsibility helps one to understand when to shift their responses, in fact, of impact. Now, I just said so many things. And some things might have left you really puzzled, and some things you might have retained really easily. Let's review in totality, but instead this time, using my life. 1, I finally paused in my driveway, acknowledging the fatigue I was experiencing. 2, I noticed my symptoms without labeling myself as lazy or weak. 3, I separated the lies my mind was telling me from reality. Rest and care were necessary. 4, instead of pushing through things that only led to more pain, more exhaustion, I finally stopped to listen because that promoted clarity and strength. 5, my response, eating well, seeking care, resting, was my responsibility, and it would shape my recovery. I sought medical help. I couldn't keep pretending. That moment forced me to stop to listen to my mind, to my body, to my limits, to the thoughts I had been avoiding. Clarity of mind did not begin when I found the right medical diagnosis. Rather, it began when I stopped believing that endurance was equal to that of strength. You cannot control every thought that enters your mind, but you can choose which ones you allow to stay. And sometimes listening, really, truly listening, is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you.